Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture. Albion Never Dies. This episode is the Britishness of For Your Eyes Only, a 1981 James Bond film starring Roger Moore. But don't worry, if you've never seen it, or if you haven't seen it since it came out, don't worry, it's not a scene-by-scene analysis or breakdown of character or plot, and I won't be giving away too much about the film beyond the usual shape of an action film, the locations, and a few lines. I'm talking about what stands out to me as a cultural detail. And I'd like to thank everyone who messaged me after my last episode, The Britishness of Skyfall, especially Alex, Mark, Kane, Daniel, Michael, and David, for all your kind messages, for sharing this episode with your friends. It's very, very, very much appreciated. And I'm doing this because this is really my underrated Roger Moore film. My favourite is The Man with the Golden Gun, and I've talked about that on YouTube, but this is one that I think deserves a little more love than it usually gets. First of all, just to situate the film, I have a very special contribution from a friend of mine, Joe Darlington, who is the host of the YouTube and podcast Being James Bond, and the author of the book of the same name. Here he gives his 1-minute summary of the film, how it struck him when it first came out. Please do enjoy.
For Your Eyes Only was my very first exposure to James Bond. It was exotic, exciting, a real cut above of action movies that I was used to. Looking back on it many years later, I noticed that not only does this film really stand up well over time, but the thing I noticed most is the versatility of Roger Moore. People ask me all the time who my favorite James Bond is. I really can't pick a favorite James Bond. I'm not just being diplomatic when I say that every James Bond actor brings something different to the role. Each one brings a unique take on the character. What I love about Roger Moore is that when the films wanted to get more grounded and down to earth, they didn't need to recast. Roger Moore was able to shift gears so perfectly for this film. As the films went from fun and campy back to serious espionage, Roger Moore just rolled with it. He pulled it off with grace and elegance, really brought a sophisticated performance to the character. So yeah, not only is For Your Eyes Only a great film, but I think it's a real tribute to Roger Moore and the real complexity and depth he was able to bring to the character. And For Your Eyes Only will always remain a top 5 film in my book.
Thank you very much to Joe for that contribution, and he mentioned the change of tone between this film and the previous one, which was Moonraker. Roger Moore said in his book Bond on Bond, once you've been to space, there isn't a lot further you can go with the next villain, so it was decided to bring the next film, For Your Eyes Only, and its protagonists back to Earth. The only problem for Jim is that he couldn't really be sure who the bad guy was. And thank you very much to Pete Brooker for giving me that book recently. If you're interested in the making of and what led to that change in tone, then I couldn't recommend a better book than Some Kind of Hero, which was written by Matthew Field and Ajay Chowdhury. This is a really, really interesting book. It says the actor who played the villain said that his character didn't reveal himself by being a horrible person. When things started to go wrong, then he revealed his true colours. John Glen, the director, helped me with my efforts to remain plausible. I said to him, you must watch out if I ever seem villainous. Please don't let me do that. So I found that really interesting, the subtlety. And indeed the director, John Glen, wrote a book For My Eyes Only, and he especially focuses on this film because it was his first time as a director. So he had been the second unit director, filming stunts and so on. He'd done quite a lot, so he had been working his way up through Eon Productions, but his most famous scene is The Spy Who Loved Me, where he films the parachute jump off a cliff. Now most Brits know this, but I showed it to Chinese people in China who'd never ever seen it. Of course this was made in the 70s when Bond films were not released in mainland China. I showed it to them, and watching their reactions to it for the first time was a real experience. All of these books really show origin of this film is from Ian Fleming, from the short stories such as Risico, which is actually with Italian gangsters, rather than Greece, For Your Eyes Only, which is of course set in Jamaica. So there are changes throughout. There's one chapter from Live and Let Die, which had reportedly been in and out of Eon Productions' James Bond film scripts for about a decade. There's one little detail from Goldfinger, the book, which wasn't put into that film. And the ATAC, the Automatic Targeting Attack Communicator, which is the thing everyone's chasing after throughout much of the film, is very, 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 very much like the Elektra in From Russia with Love. or indeed like the Enigma machine in the actual Second World War, in terms of plot use and how it looks, with the Elektra to the ATAC machine. Anyway, it's not named after a Fleming book. This is nonetheless named after a Fleming short story and has a huge amount of Ian Fleming DNA, updated with contemporary nuclear weapons, spy ships, which I'll be talking about, and there's a little spiky sea mine, which for my eyes only, John Glen's book talks about how that was there, really inspired by his time with the Sea Cadets, which I rarely like. I'm not going to talk about the film in order, by the way. I just want, first of all, to talk about submarines, because there's some really good bits with little submarines, and I thought I'd talk about the Britishness of submarines. Why not? Thanks to a little book called The Return of Heroic Failures, written by Stephen Pyle. Now, Stephen Pyle is the president in exile of the not terribly good club of Great Britain. He formed the club in an attempt to overthrow Western civilization's mania for success. He himself was overthrown when the Book of Heroic Failures, the official handbook, became a bestseller. The club disbanded in 1979 when 20,000 applications for memberships were received in 2 months. Thereby, even as failures, they failed. So this is from his second book, The Return of Heroic Failures, where he talks about the world's worst submarine. The British, of course, were pioneers for submarines. Therefore, we got all the first mistakes. He writes, "The conventional submarine, rising and descending at will, is, of course, only of limited interest to our sort of student. It does not compare with the more versatile K-boats, which the British developed in 1917. K1 sank after colliding with K4 off the Danish coast. K2 caught fire on its first test dive. K3 plunged inexplicably to the seabed with the Prince of Wales on board, eventually resurfacing only to sink after being rammed by K6. K4 ran aground, K5 foundered in the Bay of Biscay. K14 sprang a leak before its first trial and during one celebrated manoeuvre in the North Sea it collided with K22, which used to be K13 but was renamed after it keeled over in Loch Gair in Scotland while on a seaworthiness trial. K14 sank, whilst K22 was damaged beyond repair after getting in the way of HMS Inflexible, a cruiser which happened to be passing. In the same manoeuvre, K17 was struck by HMS Fearless, having already been hit by K7, thereby incapacitating itself. On observing this mayhem, K4 stopped engines, altered course, and was rammed by K6, which later got stuck on the ocean bed. Better still, K15 sank in Portsmouth Harbour before going anywhere or doing anything. Ks 18, 19, 20 and 21 were never completed, but their keels were modified for use in the new M range. M1 was rammed by a merchant vessel while on diving patrol in the Channel, and M2 sank after springing a leak." There we go, from the Book of Heroic Failures by Stephen Pyle. Now, of course, there were Cold War uses of submarines throughout, and this has been described, well, Time magazine covered this in 1968, talking about ferrets, the little fleet of spy ships, and 30 Hot Days by Mehmet Ali Birant also talked about this, especially during the Cyprus conflict when a Soviet spy ship was there spotting, and I should say a spy ship, not a submarine, but it was spotting the conflict between the Turks and Greek Cypriot forces, as these were two kind of NATO-aligned, two armies in the Western camp who were coming to blows. So much useful data gained from that by the Soviets. And I should say, I am, of course, a Turkish expert. I speak Turkish. I've been studying Turkey for 20 years, and this podcast has given me an enormous opportunity to study Greece, as the film For Your Eyes Only is largely set, well, in the Cold War and in Greece. Entirely set in the Cold War and predominantly set in Greece. And of course, most Brits who study, the Eastern Med would be more familiar with Greece than Turkey. So it's been a very good exercise for me. After all, Greece gained independence from the Ottoman Empire, sometimes referred to as the Turkish Empire, with British support. Most famously, Lord Byron died aiding the Greek struggle for freedom, and he was a hereditary lord, playwright, poet, and serial adulterer. And following the Greek War of Independence, the boundaries of the Kingdom of Greece were actually agreed upon at the London Conference of 1832. Those initial boundaries were relatively small, but throughout the 19th century, Greece would gradually expand and expand, usually with British support, sometimes direct assistance, sometimes financial support, diplomatic support, all kinds of different supports, as so many Brits were very, very pro-Greece. The question was, how far should Greece expand? And from 1844, there was something called the Megali idea. This was the idea of creating the Greece of antiquity, that of 2 continents and 5 seas. To list them, Europe and Asia, the Ionian Sea, the Aegean, the Marmara, the Black, and the Libyan Sea, that part of the Mediterranean, kind of south of Crete, between Cyrene and Alexandria. This was the idea, and it drove the conflict between Greece and the remnants of the Ottoman Empire, eventually coming to its great conclusion in the battles of 1922. For a grand sweeping work on this, do try Ataturk by Lord Kinross. He's a rare Brit, like myself, who focuses on Turkey rather than Greece. 1922 is also when the King of Greece, Constantine I, was forced to abdicate. More on that later. But for a period of, well, around 100 years, Britain and Greece were very much hand in hand with the creation of modern Greece. So it's hardly surprising that in the Second World War, Greece was a particular focus and a particular fascination for the UK, and it also happened to be a particular focus for Germany. It was not a particular focus for the Americans. Nicholas Rankin wrote a book on Ian Fleming's Commandos, and he says the Americans saw the Aegean as a distraction, but both Adolf Hitler and Winston Churchill were obsessed with it. And I went through Churchill's book on the Second World War, and there he has his letters between himself and the American president, and you can see the difference in tone between the two. Operation Mincemeat, by the way, plays with a concept that's kind of raised in these letters, the idea that Greece should be focused on really just to waste the German resources and to have it as some kind of distraction. More interestingly, and more recently, there's been a recent biography of Ian Fleming by Nicholas Shakespeare, and he talks about Ian Fleming's brother Peter being sent out to Greece and ultimately having to be rescued by a Royal Navy officer, a Lieutenant Bond, Rodney Bond, which may well be an inspiration for James Bond's name. Other theories do exist. Greece during the Second World War is very, very interesting, although perhaps especially because it wasn't an American interest, there aren't a huge number of books, movies, films about it. So my suggestion, if you're interested in fiction, and fiction never lies, would first of all be Captain Corelli's Mandolin from 1994 novel, which I greatly enjoyed. There is a 2001 film. To be honest, I haven't bothered with it. So that's set on the largest of the Greek Ionian Islands, Cephalonia. I'm not great on Greek pronunciation, during the Italian and German occupation. There is also a TV movie. Now, the TV movie Sword of Honour, back in 2001, is based on the trilogy of novels by Evelyn Waugh, which is kind of loosely parallels the author's wartime experiences. The novels, by the way, if you're interested in those, are Men at Arms, 1952, Officers and Gentlemen, 1955, and Unconditional Surrender, 1961, which was marketed as the end of the battle in North America. The TV adaptation was scripted by William Boyd, who would later write the James Bond spin-off novel Solo. Perhaps more strikingly, it starred Daniel Craig in the lead role. Now, at time of recording, the entire thing is on YouTube, but of course that is a copyright infringement and it may soon disappear. However, it was a very, very memorable TV show. After the Second World War, sadly, Greece was not at peace. It went straight from the Second World War, really, into the Greek Civil War. From December 1944 to January 1945, and then 46 to 49, a two-stage conflict in which Greek communists unsuccessfully tried to gain control of Greece. Now the Americans started to get interested, as this was a Cold War struggle that became hot, and most people would say this is the first instance in the Cold War of things getting hot. On October the 16th, 1949, the Greek Communist Broadcasting Station announced the end of open hostilities, and many of the remaining communist fighters fled the country into neighbouring Albania. It's estimated that more than 50,000 combatants died in this conflict, and more than 500,000 Greeks were temporarily displaced from their homes by the fighting. It left a very bitter legacy between segments of the Greek population, and I'll say now my recommended rabbit hole is actually Albania, during the Cold War, as Albania is referenced throughout the film for your eyes only, but it is very, very interesting. I'll leave it at that, especially during the Sino-Soviet split. And of course, Greece came under the Greek junta, the regime of colonels, a right-wing military junta that ruled Greece from 67 to 74, until the conflict in Cyprus really came to boiling point, which was the end of the junta. Their failure abroad led to the collapse of their regime at home. So Greece was democratic in the modern sense, and in the modern day, of course it is the home of ancient democracy, but it was democratic in the modern sense from 74, and this film is only 81. It was relatively new at that time. And the shadow of the Second World War hangs over the film. There's multiple references to the King's Medal, and I was curious about this. Of course, we've had many kings and we have many medals, but there is such a thing as a King's Medal. According to the National Archives, the Sovereign, by royal warrant dated 23rd of October 1945, instituted a medal, the King's Medal, for service in the cause of freedom. Its purpose was to recognise foreign nationals, mainly civilians of Allied countries, who had given meritorious service in furtherance of the interests of the British Commonwealth in the Allied cause during the Second World War. 2,539 awards of the King's Medal for Service were made. So one of the characters in the movie has the King's Medal. This is a real thing, and I started to look into, were there any famous people that I personally know who got this medal, who around the world got it, and I went on a bit of a rabbit hole looking at especially Americans who've been awarded this. So, for example, US fundraisers for the British War Relief included Winthrop W. Aldrich, president of the British War Relief Society and the National War Fund, Inc. He later became US ambassador to the UK. Also, Grace McCurdy, who was the first American woman to gain a PhD from Columbia University. Her research was Royal Women during the Hellenistic period, and again, she was a fundraiser for Britain during the Second World War. And interestingly, John George Trump, the uncle of President Donald Trump, he received a King's Medal. J.G. Trump was a professor at MIT from 36 to 85, and his speciality was X-rays, but during the Second World War he switched to radar, to which he made a significant contribution. The radar in general was an edge the British had over the Germans, particularly interesting as it arose out of the research from the German Heinrich Rudolf Hertz in the late 19th century. Reportedly, it was part of hiding how we knew when the Germans were coming during night raids was a public propaganda campaign claiming that eating carrots was allowing British pilots to see in the dark. The Scot Arnold Frederick Wilkins is largely seen as kind of the co-father of radar. He suggested it to his boss, Robert Watson Watt. He suggested this idea and it drove the research, but John George Trump was awarded the King's Medal for his contribution. Now, this is something that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. The movie, For Your Eyes Only, touches on some ancient sayings. James Bond tells a young lady, the Chinese have a saying, before you set out on revenge, you first dig 2 graves. This is taken from the short story For Your Eyes Only, on which the film is partly based. And he says it to a young Judy in the original story. Before you set out on revenge, dig 2 graves. He phrased it slightly differently. And I was talking about this with some of my Chinese friends. One of my friends said it kind of reminded him of a former Chinese premier who said, I've prepared 100 graves, 99 for corrupt officials and 1 for myself. But I also talked to my friend Max James Joy, who I've had on the podcast before, and he was interested in this too, and he's talked to a number of his colleagues. He lives in China, he works in China at an international school, and he talked to colleagues from South Africa, the USA and China to see what they said. I hope you enjoy his 6 interviews.
Hello, Mr. Shane. Can you tell me what country you're from?
I'm from South Africa.
And there's a Chinese saying, if you're set on revenge, dig 2 graves. Have you heard of this saying?
I haven't heard of it, but I can sort of understand what it means. Well, I think I do.
What's your understanding of it?
Or if you're going to seek revenge, you need to prepare to die too.
Hi, Jack. Can you tell me what country you're from?
China.
And there's this saying in China, if you're set on revenge, you need to dig 2 graves. Do you know the saying?
Not really exactly understand this kind of like a saying. So can you give us more details?
So if you're set on revenge, if you want to get revenge against someone, you need to dig 2 graves, dig 2 holes for the body. Do you understand that saying?
Yeah. So that's the normal like understanding we're saying about like our nation.
So it's a Chinese saying. Have you heard this before?
Yeah.
And what's your understanding of this sentence?
So actually, it depends on different people's background and experience. So if you experience something like the same, you will understand more. But if you just heard from someone else, so you'd better to like search online and to get more explanations in details. Then you can understand more.
Thank you. Hello, Yolanda. Can you tell me what country you're from?
I'm from China.
There's this saying, if you are set on revenge, you should first dig 2 graves. What's your understanding of this saying?
So as for me, it means like if you decide to take revenge, you better prepare for 2 graves. It is a warning that revenge often leads to bad consequences. When you seek revenge, it might not only harm the person you are after, but also bring harm to yourself. So it is saying revenge is a dangerous thing and not a good choice. That's it.
Hi, Bobo. Can you tell me what country you're from?
I'm from China.
And there's this saying, if you are set on revenge, you have to dig 2 graves. Have you heard of this saying?
Yes, I heard of it before.
And what's your understanding of this saying?
Be nice to others.
Ooh. Hi, Gannon. What country are you from?
The US.
There's this saying in China, before you set out for revenge, you must first dig 2 graves. Have you heard of this before?
I have not.
What's your impression of this saying?
My impression is that it means taking revenge on someone can also end up hurting yourself in the end, so that it's not a wise action to take.
And how do you feel this reflects on Chinese culture, or your interpretation of the Chinese culture?
I think it seems like an accurate reflection of Chinese culture, because I know that in Chinese culture, acts of violence or aggression are not very common or very widely welcomed. So they would rather seek resolutions of other types instead of an act of revenge or aggression. So I think it's a good reflection of Chinese culture as well.
Hi, I'm Bali. Can you tell me what country are you from?
Hi, I'm from South Africa.
There's this saying in China, if you seek revenge, first you must dig 2 graves. Have you heard of this saying before?
Yes, I have. Coming from a country where we had to learn how to be forgiving. So we know, because if we didn't, we could have destroyed our country while trying to seek revenge.
So this saying apparently originates in China, but you also say there is a part of this saying in your culture as well. So first of all, how do you think this relates to Chinese culture, this saying?
I think same thing with Chinese people having gone through a whole lot of, past turmoil. They have had to forgive certain things while remembering what happened, but you have to let certain things go so that you can focus on your own country. And with that focus of just building China, they have been able to achieve the greatest of things. But if they had focused on seeking revenge all the time, that's where the energy would have gone. And China wouldn't be this China that we live in right now.
So do you see any similarities between Chinese culture and your culture in regards to this saying?
Absolutely, because what this means for me, specifically as a South African, is that you can choose where your energies go. You can remember everything that has happened, but do you want to put all your energy into it and throw yourself downhill while doing it?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very, very, very much to Max James Joy for giving us that insight into the South African, the American, and the Chinese perspective on this ancient saying. And I very, very much enjoyed hearing those. I must also say thank you to Adam Muckle, who I met at a recent party, and he was talking to me about his book, A Bond Odyssey, which explores the links between Greek mythology and the James Bond series. And that's important because there's a character who, when Bond says, before you set out on revenge, first dig 2 graves, she says, well, I'm like Elektra. Elektra is a key figure in ancient Greek plays, somebody who is determined to take revenge for the death of her father. One of the plays starts out, my hateful bed and my mournful house is well acquainted with my sleepless nights. It knows how much I cry for my father's dreadful fate. And also has the line, he who sins against the law should receive the same punishment swiftly, death. So if you are interested in that perspective, I say Adrian Muckle has a whole book on it, and of course the plays are available to read in many, many different translations. Greece is, of course, a Orthodox Christian country, and Bond on Bond, going back to Roger Moore's book, talks about the mountaintop monastery in Meteora, 2 kilometres north of Kalambaka in central Greece. That is the scene of the film's finale. Like 23 other monasteries in the area, the one they use was built in a pretty inaccessible location during the Serbia-Byzantine Wars of the 14th century, where the only access was by a removable wooden ladder. I really, really enjoy that ending. It's a wonderful location and a real location, not a hollowed out volcano or a city under the sea or something like that. It's a real one, which is, I think, gives it a certain something. And a lot of the film talks about Saint Cyril. So again, I had a little look into this. Saint Cyril, born, 827 in Thessalonica, along with his brother Methodius, is known as the Apostle to the Slavs, so particularly important in Eastern Orthodoxy. Generally, their father was Greek while their mother was Slavic, so they were proficient in both the Greek and the Slavic language, and this made them uniquely qualified to introduce Christianity to the Slavic people. They could communicate in the Slavic language, they could understand the Slavic culture. Eventually, the pair travelled in order to preach to the people and convert them to Christianity, which, by the way, is why we have the Cyrillic alphabet. It's the followers of the two brothers, not the two brothers themselves, the followers who name this alphabet after them. And just as a little cultural detail, I'd like to thank Alexis Kriakou. Again, my apologies for any mispronunciations of names. I'm not familiar with Greek names. He is an expert on Greek antiquities based in London, and he tells me on good authority that whilst in the film is a confession booth in the Greek church for dramatic purposes, in reality, Greeks do their confessions to a priest face to face, with no booze involved. So, as I come to a close, I just have to consider: are there any famous Greek Brits? The film focuses on Britain and Greece so much. The first one that came to my mind was Prince Philip, who was, of course, born on the Greek island of Corfu, 10th of June, 1921. I had a look online to see if there were others, but frankly, no, he is the most famous. The Duke of Edinburgh was named Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. Of course, all the European royal families were intermarried, and his Royal Highness's early life has been described as, well, turbulent. He was the only son of Prince Andrew of Greece, who was the younger brother of King Constantine I of Greece, the one forced to abdicate in 1922 that I mentioned, about 20 minutes ago. His paternal father is, of course, of Danish descent, as Prince Andrew was the grandson of King Christian IX of Denmark. His mother was Princess Alice of Battenberg, the eldest child of Prince Louis of Battenberg and sister of Earl Mountbatten of Burma. Prince Louis became a naturalised British subject in 1868, joined the Royal Navy and rose to become an Admiral of the Fleet and First Sea Lord in 1914. This according to the Royal Family website. During the First World War, Prince Louis changed the family name to Mountbatten and was created Marquess of Milford Haven. Prince Philip adopted the family name of Mountbatten when he became a naturalised British citizen and renounced his Greek and Danish royal titles in 1947. King George V ordered that a Royal Navy ship should evacuate the family from Corfu, and Philip was carried to safety in a cot made of an orange box on December 1922. He was just 18 months old, hence his remark that he is a refugee husband to the late Queen. I must add, my mother met Prince Philip on a few occasions, well, both my parents. My father guided Prince Philip around Kuwait. My father was stationed there with the British Army. He was training up the Kuwait Army, and so they hosted the royals, the Queen and Prince Philip, as they travelled around Kuwait, and later on Dad was commander in Berlin as they met. So mother was lined up with all the officers' wives and was told very strictly, you don't talk to them unless they talk to you. And so as Prince Philip went down the line, my mother disobeyed and said, hello, remember me? We guided you around Kuwait. And he said, God, Kuwait, have you recovered yet? His sense of humour was notorious, absolutely notorious. Incidentally, one of my favourite Prince Philip stories, I've looked this up, I've got a book called The Wicked Wit of Prince Philip. And at a reception for MPs held at Buckingham Palace in 2002, he met the new MP, Panjit Danda, and Prince Philip asked what he had done before entering Parliament. And hearing that the politician had been a student and a trade union official, the Prince was dismissive, saying, you didn't do anything then. Danda responded, what did you do before becoming Duke of Edinburgh? I served in the Royal Navy during the war, the Prince replied, smiling broadly. Accounts differ as to whether or not this was accompanied by a one- or two-fingered gesture. The palace denied that Prince Philip would have done any such thing. Danda himself claimed Prince Philip raised one finger and explained he had a big smile on his face and was very much in a sense of fun. Yes, Prince Philip did serve during the Second World War and had, well, quite the adventures, as we might say. I shall draw to a close here with one final piece from Stephen Pyle's The Return of Heroic Failures. A lot of the film, for your eyes only, takes place in winter. There's a great deal of winter sports, and although this happened long after the film, in 1988, compared to the film 1981, I think it's worth talking about. The worst ski jumper. Few people know who won the 90 metres ski jump at the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary. Everyone, however, knows that Eddie the Eagle Edwards came a definitive last, flapping both arms for mid-air balance and complaining that he could not see anything because his pebble spectacles steamed up during takeoff. A plasterer from Cheltenham, he amazed everyone by deciding to enter the Olympics after several practice runs on the local dry ski slope. His fame went before him, and a huge cheering crowd met him at the airport, where his plane arrived late and his bag split open so that every single piece of gear went around and around the luggage carousel, with Eddie in hot pursuit. Next morning, he found that his ski bindings had been crushed, and so he missed his first two practice jumps while they were repaired. He got in one jump and survived only to find that he was locked out of his cabin with all his clothes inside. Since then, the Olympics have tightened up their entrance criteria. I hope you enjoyed this look at For Your Eyes Only. I feel that I spoiled nothing, so I hope if you do watch it, that you enjoy it. Thank you very much, and goodbye.